Okay, so in this presentation, I'd like to address what's Dyke in relation to public archaeology. So, what this talk is about the third longest linear monument in the British Isles. There's still a debate to be had, but it seems to be demonstrably at least half a kilometre to a kilometre longer than the Antonine frontier. So, only Hadrian's Wall and Offa's Dyke are longer than Wat's Dyke. Its relationship with Offa's Dyke and other linear monuments on the Anglo-Welsh border is open for contention and ongoing debate. So there's an ongoing set of issues there about what the monument is. But what I want to do in this presentation is to address and evaluate, how do we engage publics with it? What stories do we tell about it? And to do that, I think we have to understand something of the challenge of dealing with a monument and that straddles the English and Welsh borders. It's on either. It straddles the border and is found on either side of the border, and a monument that encapsulates many different sort of connotations. At some levels, it's seen as simply a handmaiden or auxiliary monument to Offa's Dyke. For others, it languishes in relation to outdated, outmoded narratives. For some, it's like Cyril Fox argued in the 30s and 1950s, it is a monument of the sort of a build-up monument, a monument of Ethelbald, perhaps, an early 8th century Mercian monument. Then it went through a phase of being 5th century based on excavations at Mile Oak, Oswestry. And more recently, it has been dated at Gaboan to the early 9th century. So it's a monument that's been floating in and out of its date and its relationship with Offa's Dyke and its relationship to the story of the Anglo-Welsh borderland, the marches of Wales as they've emerged through the Mercian period, the late Anglo-Saxon period, and up to the Norman conquest. So I want to try and tackle some of those issues. So, public archaeology in Wat's Dyke. So I suppose the first point to make is that this is a monument that is in many ways poorly understood. It runs parallel to Offa's Dyke in its northern area, extends beyond Offa's Dyke, going from the sea on the Dee estuary at Basingwork down past Oswestry to hit the tributary of the Vyrnwy, the Morda leading to the Vyrnwy, leading to the Severn. Therefore, it's connecting river systems, and it seems to protect the Cheshire and Shropshire plains. It's often shorthanded as a border, a frontier work, but we don't have a handle exactly on how it would have been operating, and for how long it was operating, and indeed when exactly it was built and by who. So let me give you some key issues and illustrations. So here's the schematic from Malem and Hayes's 2008 Anglo-Saxon Studies in Archaeology and History journal article, where they use OSL dating to attribute the monument at Gaboan to later than Offa's Dyke, to the early 9th century. That's on the left. And on the right is a plan showing you the line of Wat's Dyke. Hill and Worthington's work asserted that everywhere there was a gap and they looked for it, they found Wat's Dyke. So their argument is that it's a continuous linear earthwork of bank and ditch running from the Dee estuary at Basingwork at the top there, following various rivers, past Mould, over high ground, joining the Allen, following along the Allen on its top of its west bank to Bryn Allen Hill Fort, and jumping over the Clywedog and the Gwenfro and the Clywedog down to the Dee, and then following the Dee to the confluence of the Dee and the Ceiriog, and then the Morlas Brook, and then across to Oswestry, and then there's a debate about to what extent it would have continued past Maesbury, canalised in lowland marshland down to the Vanwy, or close over the Morder at least, close to the Vanwy. In other words, connecting up the river systems and protecting the Cheshire and Shropshire plains. So a monument that's designed in relation to watercourses, in relation to land routes, that may have protected a land route along its line, as well as allowing blocking movement along river valleys in and out of the Welsh higher ground, the Highlands. Key facts about Dyke then, just to give you a flavour. It's a V-shaped ditch up to 8 metres wide and at places up to 3 metres deep. The bank is made of earth and stone, and there's evidence of stone at the base in particular that could have been up to 5 metres wide and over a metre, some perhaps up to 2 metres high. And as Fox admitted, this is a monument of comparable scale to Offa's Dyke. It's preserved because of its more lower land location, rarely as well as Offa's Dyke, but where it's found and is survived, it's a monument of comparable scale in terms of its magnitude as an earthwork. And it's estimated for running anywhere up to 40 miles or 62, 63 kilometres, depending on how you estimate various gaps and elements of it. So it's a really long earthwork, longer than Wansdyke and East and West Wansdyke put together, and the Roman road that's thought to be part of a linking frontier, maybe. So it's big, and only Offa's Dyke dwarfs it. It ends at Basingwork on the Dee estuary. It runs to Maesbury Marsh, linking those rivers and streams together. And it's carefully surveyed in relation to topography, following watercourses, the tops of or breaks of valley slopes, incorporating little hillocks in its line, as well as major hills and major earthwork or major landmarks. Other key facts about it, as I said, it's been dated most recently to the early 9th century. And if it's therefore understood as a Mercian frontier work, it's not a late 8th century work of Offa, but a later work, perhaps of Cenwulf, a later king, a successor to Offa, who reigned from 796 to 821. We can't be sure of that, and there's still maybe new dating may alter that. It may become slightly earlier again and be a contemporary with Offa's Dyke, or maybe it will be securely identified as later in the early 9th century. But certainly the current understanding counters previous thinking that suggested a 5th century date and 7th century or early 8th century date. It seems to be at least contemporary or later than Offa's Dyke. Why is it called What? Who is What? Well, people don't know. And one idea is that maybe this is a deliberate antiquation, a deliberate legendary association. I'm thinking very much of the work of discussions of Alex Langlands and Andrew Reynolds, who for Wansdyke have seen the Woden's Dyke name not as a pagan survival or evidence that the earthwork was pagan period, but that it's a later sort of ancestral connotation in a landscape recently acquired by the Mercians. It may have been, like I put here, dedicating Queen Elizabeth, giving the territory the name Virginia after Queen Elizabeth. Could this be a deliberate claiming of a legendary or ancestral past by dedicating the monument to such a hero or historical figure? So we don't know for sure, but maybe it doesn't tell us anything about the history of the monument, but more of the connotations of giants building such a grand monument that may have been cultivated at the time or very soon after its construction. Now, let me introduce you to Dyke, because not a lot of people have seen it in all its different guises. This is at one of its best preserved sections in Erddick Park, a National Trust property, the Rookery. This is in parkland, so it survives in parkland environments. And in some parts of parkland, it survives incredibly well as a massive bank and ditch. The bank here is on the left, ditch in the middle, as you can see, and the counterscarp, or at least the natural surface, but left before it drops off out of view on your viewer's right here, is on the right hand side. Whether it's an overt counterscarp bank or not has been debated. It also survives in woodland. Again, this is Erddig. Here's the monument looking over the monument, looking northwest in woodland. So you can see the deep ditch surviving despite heavily denuded, and then rising up to the bank where the photographer, in this case me, is standing. It survives in farmland, both pasture and arable land, in different degrees of survival. And here's some very friendly Rædwald sheep in the ditch and on the banks to give you scale. And some Wrexham horses. So here's some of my students on a field trip standing on Dyke and looking north at Pandy near Wrexham. To make the point that the monument is actually quite close to many people's homes, and here it's in farmland, grazing animals, but it's very close to conurbations. And here again at Erddig Park, the very cleared and well managed section of Dyke sits right next to the 1970s, 1980s houses, so that the back gardens of those properties come right up to the monument. And that's a conservation issue and a management issue, but it also makes the point that people live very close to this monument. This is in people's back gardens, quite literally, in some parts of northeast Wales and in Shropshire. It runs through the key, Welsh towns of Holywell and Wrexham, and also the major Welsh town, the English town of Oswestry, the borders town of Oswestry. It survives in very different levels of preservation. So here, in very close proximity, you can see you can make it out. You can see the ditch here, and you can see the bank. And if this is a counterscarp, there's a counterscarp feature here. Before the land drops off here at Soughton Farm. You're looking north along the monument, so the monument is facing west. The ditch is always on the west side, facing the Welsh side. And here you can see how it's very denuded. The ditch is almost completely filled. The bank has been spread. And yet, only a short way away, we have it just a tiny way away, looking south in this case. So the bank is on the viewer's left, and the ditch in the middle, obviously, and way the Welsh side is to the right of shot here. You can see the magnitude of the bank and ditch surviving in this stretch. And the fact that it's part of the consciousness of people, more than Offa's Dyke in the north of the Anglo-Welsh borderlands, is clear by the fact that it has historically had two primary schools named after it that are situated on it, one at Minneitha and now just called Minneitha Primary School, but it used to be called Dyke School, and here still called Dyke School in Acton, Wrexham. So you have that sense of it's connected in. This monument that is now on the backs of houses again is part of people's consciousness. And yet it very quickly disappears, even when it's a massive monument, as it is here. You're looking south towards old Oswestry hill fort there, the Iron Age hill fort on the horizon. So that's old Oswestry up there, and you can see the ramparts. Okay, this is Dyke running into it, and the point is here that the hedgerow preserves it to a degree, but it also conceals it. I mean, what you're actually looking at, ploughed here, the ploughed land, the edge of the ditch is actually over here. And this is the denuded ditch. And the bank is hidden on the other side. So when you look up to that tree, the bank is stretching way into the next field. So it's a very wide, massive monument, but it's all kind of concealed protected to a degree, but concealed by its association with hedgerows. And it's damaged in many ways. It's been damaged since the Middle Ages. I mean, this is Erddig Castle, and this is a massive ditch of the 11th century Anglo-Norman motte and bailey that's cut through and bisected Dyke. So you're looking at a profile of Dyke here. There's the ditch and there's the bank, cut by the 11th century monument. It has been damaged ever since. So it's denuded, it's broken up. And when it's run through towns that have expanded, particularly in the 19th and 20th century, as it here at Wrexham, as is at the back of allotments just near Morrison's supermarket, this is Dyke. The path, the concrete path, is in the ditch. And here's the most hilarious bit: a reconstituted bit of Dyke, without name, you won't know what it is, next to the Premier Inn and adjacent to the railway line at Wrexham General Railway Station. So this is Dyke. It's in the middle of Wales's largest, North Wales's largest town, and yet the consciousness of the monument is inhibited by the fact that not many people know what they're looking at. I mean, would you know what that is? There's no sign telling you it's Dyke. There's no sign telling you what that bit of bank is there. It just looks like a bit of modern earthwork, perhaps at the edge of a car park. So at one level, it's very prominent. It has primary schools named after it, roads named after it. At another level, it's invisible. It's monumentally invisible. And the other important thing about Dyke is it integrates into another series of important heritage sites. The already 1,000 years or more old Oswestry hill fort was incorporated into its line. So as well as sitting next to and running through a major town, there's the red line of Dyke. One can go to Old Oswestry hill fort and appreciate the line of this 8th or 9th century Mercian frontier work. At Basingstoke Abbey, you have a medieval Cistercian monastery. You have St Winifred's Chapel, a late medieval pilgrimage site, a holy well, and stayed such right the way through to the modern day, within a landscape of industrial heritage, leisure, and a tiny bit of Dyke is still preserved in that landscape. So you have the opportunity, the proximity, and while denuded in many places, monumental survival very close to many people's homes. A monument that could really be better understood, better engaged with by thousands and thousands of people. And it has its own heritage trail. This is the Dyke Way. It's only a decade old, or just over a decade old, established in 2009, I think, and with its own stiles and footpaths. And the Dyke Way doesn't follow Dyke for much of its distance, but it follows the broad route of Dyke and raises awareness of it. Now we can do, this is CPAT's dig in 2018 at Rædwald Park, and we can do little excavations in to promote understanding and research of the monument, and for a time allow visitors to access and participate in archaeological work. But really, in the longer term, that's a drop in the ocean if major heritage sites like National Trust's Rædwald Hall have hardly any heritage interpretation of this monument. Not the guidebooks, the interpretation panels. You wouldn't know Dyke's there. You wouldn't know, walking in front of this major country home, that in part of the landscaping of that house, they destroyed this major early medieval monument. It ran right in front of it. In fact, I'm probably standing, when I took that photograph, on, historically, the ditch of Dyke. So how do we expect people to engage with a monument that's so monumentally present and yet somehow completely invisible through our inability to, explain its presence? And indeed, a recent heritage board at Rædwald Castle mentions Dyke, but gives it the wrong century, says it's 8th century, and doesn't show where it is in relation to the castle. At Greenfield Valley, the walking trails, the industrial heritage on display. Dyke is there on the slide, on the map, as a tiny little hashard space, but there's nothing to tell you when you get to the monument what you're looking at. Indeed, of 62 kilometres of Dyke, the only place you can actually see on the ground a marked out line of where Dyke is in Wrexham Municipal Cemetery. And indeed, the original 19th century's western border followed the line of Dyke. And indeed, they've marked out on the paths that cross it, they've marked out Dyke and Clauthwat in Welsh to denote where the paths cross it. So you can both see it marked out on the ground, and in the beneath graves of the 19th and early 20th century, you can see the rise of Dyke running along on the edge of the oldest part of the cemetery. So it's both visible and invisible. In fact, actually, there's only one up-to-date, pretty decent heritage site interpretation board, and that's where Malem and Hayes did their excavations a decade ago, which has a map, photographs, an artist's reconstruction, and text. It's in Shropshire, so it's only monolingual, but it does a good job. The problem is, this is a site where Dyke isn't very visible. So you've got an interpretation panel without a monument. Well, it is there as a low bank, but I don't think many non-experts are going to fully appreciate what they're looking at here. So we have many monumental sections without explanation and interpretation, and then we have very denuded sections with interpretation boards that show you or explain to you things that are almost invisible. So it's very contradictory situation. So what do we do about this? Where do we go? Do we maintain this passive neglect, both by local people and local landowners, but also by heritage authorities of Dyke? Do we let it get saddled with out-of-date information, with lack of engagement, or do we try and do something new, something innovative, to engage local communities and also to inform the broader national and international visitors and communities and audiences to the story of Dyke? And so one of the things I'm very much inspired by and we'll hear about more of is John G. Swagger's Oswestry Heritage Comics. That's coming up. But the open question is, if we're going to do a public archaeology of Dyke, is it really about simply critiquing the lack of clear interpretation in museums, heritage sites, or is it about thinking about new positive strategies we can adopt to foster a sense of knowledge and engagement with this monument? A monument that's now redundant in many ways, and that's why it's important. It doesn't really follow the English-Welsh border. It speaks of an earlier experimental and perhaps short-lived phase of Mercian political and military expansionism, and yet that is a story that perhaps needs to be told, and certainly in relation to Offa's Dyke, and particularly given the fact that this has a particular connotations for the northern Welsh stretch of the Anglo-Welsh borders, the relationship of Chester and Cheshire, Shropshire and Shrewsbury to Flintshire, to Denbighshire and Wrexham, to the north of Powys. So I think there's a lot more to be done here, and I don't have a single solution, but I think John Swagger's comics are one mechanism we can pursue further to engage people in something that's both monumentally present and monumentally invisible in the landscape. But I think there are other strategies we can also think of, and digital strategies, off-site ones, maybe some of the more profitable and feasible ways of communicating Dyke to new audiences and also to in new media, new ways, new strategies of storytelling about Dyke. So I don't have all the solutions yet, but I'm setting up the problem of how we do a public archaeology of Dyke. So thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to this rather inconclusive presentation, but I think one that is important if we're going to take forward our understanding of the Anglo-Welsh borderlands and its story, the story of these linear monuments in relation to the origins of Wales, the origins of England, but also the origins of the borderlands and their communities. Thank you very much.